To Britain now, where senior members of the royal family are wrapping up a second day of mourning. King Charles III, his sons William, Harry and their wives have walked the streets of Windsor, greeting well-wishers. Earlier this evening, Buckingham Palace announced the Queen will be laid to rest on the 19th of September. She passed away on Thursday afternoon at the age of 96. Our UK correspondent Olly Barratt joins me now from Windsor. Olly, thank you so much for joining us this evening. What an eventful day in the UK. I don't think we've seen so much pageantry, around the world. I think a lot of people tuned in to watch the new king officially being proclaimed. Can you tell us more about the procedures that took place today and how it's all wrapped up and what else is new on your side?
That's right. The proclaiming of the king is a very important set-piece event in the process of the king becoming the king. He had effectively become the monarch at the point where his mother had passed away. But what this was about was effectively the organs, the mechanisms of the state and of government, acknowledging that, not just acknowledging it, but welcoming it. And we then, later in the day, saw some MPs, for example, swearing an oath of allegiance to the new king. And in that proclamation ceremony, you're quite right that it was beamed around the world, and that was the first time ever that television cameras had been allowed in such a ceremony. Inside that accession council, the king had to sign various bits of paperwork. It was all witnessed by the Queen Consort Camilla, by Prince William, who had travelled there from Windsor. And then when all of those procedures had been taken care of, the proclamation itself was read to the public at St James's Palace in really a replication of what would have happened many centuries ago, in the sense that that would have been how the public got the news. Someone would have read it from a royal palace balcony to tell people what was going on. So a significant set-piece event. It's a formality really, but it's an important constitutional formality. And as I say, the first time the television cameras have ever been allowed inside. Don't forget though that the last time such an event took place was 7 decades ago anyway.
It's very true. Now, I think the latest and what people want to know now is, of course, we heard earlier from William, Prince of Wales. He released a statement, about his grandmother's death. And I think unexpected and unannounced, we saw Prince William and his brother Harry with the wives, of course, Meghan and Catherine. We saw them in Windsor greeting people and showing, their respect to their grandmother as well, but also the people of the United Kingdom that came out in support of them. But these brothers, they've barely spoken in 2 years, apparently, and now we see them together for the first time in a very long time.
Well, yeah, here in Windsor, it really caused a huge amount of excitement. There were a lot of people up at the castle just behind me over the course of the day. They had come here of a weekend to pay their own tributes and lay cards and flowers and pay respects to the Queen. So there were a lot of people outside Windsor Castle doing that kind of thing. And then the security barriers started to be moved, and security officials and police started to become a little bit more active, and people started to wonder if something was about to happen. They really had no idea what. They were wondering whether they might see a royal or perhaps two, and then suddenly they saw all four, Harry, Meghan, Catherine, William, walking towards them. Huge cheers went up. It was an enormous surprise for the crowds that were gathered. The four of them then went through a lot of those messages and cards and flowers that had been laid, and then went on a long walkabout among the crowds. It was around 40 minutes that they were out there greeting people, shaking hands, being hugged, being kissed, people paying their respects and giving condolences about the loss of the Queen. They then drove off together, William driving the car with the other three in the back. We are told by royal sources that it was William's idea, that he phoned Harry to suggest it, and Harry very quickly, immediately said, yes, let's do it. So, of course, the crowds who cheered were very, very pleased to see the four of them together. What we don't know is what it means longer term for the relationship between the four of them, but for the people that were gathered outside the castle, the kind of things that they were saying was, perhaps the Queen in her death has brought this family together again. Of course, that relationship between those brothers in particular will remain one of great interest.
Yes, definitely, because it will be interesting to see what happens, of course, after the funeral. Will that relationship last? Another thing that I think our South African viewers especially would like to maybe be interested in is the difference between proclamation and coronation, because I think a lot of people are mistaking the two. The king was not coronated today, but please explain to us the difference between those two terms.
Yeah, the proclamation is really the point at which the Privy Council, which is an organisation made up of ministers past and present, prime ministers past and present, and other officials as well. It numbers around 700 people. There were probably a couple of hundred of them there today. They are described as advisors to the sovereign. They help get things like legislation done and dusted in the form of advice to the monarch and making all of those things work in governmental terms. So the Privy Council was there today to effectively say, with the Accession Council at the top of it, yes, we accept, we acknowledge and we welcome the fact that the king is taking over now as monarch. It was really rubber stamping the fact that Charles is now the head of state and the monarch of this country. The coronation is a slightly different affair. It's much more ceremonial. It's much more about signs and symbolism and getting that crown onto the head of whoever it may be. And that is separate, you're quite right, and won't take place for a little while. We don't know exactly when it will be, but it will be organised quite a long time in advance. It will be a major event. It'll be another one for the television cameras, and slightly removed from this period that we're in at the moment, where those formalities are taking place to make sure that the king is cemented in his position. But of course it's a sombre time and a time of mourning as well. The coronation is a rather happier affair, and that's part of the reason that it's separated from this particular period.
Thank you so much, for explaining the difference between the two. Now, we know the funeral will be taking place on the 19th of September. That's on a Monday. And we know the Queen's coffin is at Balmoral still, and it will be travelling to Edinburgh. But, of course, there is a huge amount of detail and anticipation around the travelling of that coffin. Is it true also that Princess Anne will be travelling with the coffin?
Yeah, we think so. Princess Anne has remained up in Scotland. We saw her today at Balmoral. She attended a church service with Prince Edward and Prince Andrew as well, and some of the other younger royals. She's someone that was very, very close to the Queen and is very, very close to Prince Charles as well. That coffin movement, as you say, will take some time to travel quite a short distance from Balmoral to Edinburgh, and the reason for that is that crowds are going to be allowed to line the streets to get a glimpse of the hearse as it moves past and again pay their respects. She will then lie in rest in Edinburgh before early next week that coffin will be moved down to London, we think on Tuesday, if the schedule goes according to plan. When she gets to London, there will be a period of 4 days in the end of lying in state in Westminster. The public will be able to, some members of the public will be able to visit her there, and that will end that period of lying in state on the very morning of the funeral, as you say, on September the 19th. And when it comes to the funeral, just a vast undertaking for all sorts of reasons. We know, for example, that US President Joe Biden says that he's going to come. How many other international dignitaries will get an invite in the first place and then turn up? Because clearly this was a queen who over 7 decades met thousands and thousands of dignitaries and leaders, many of whom will want to come. There won't be room in Westminster Abbey for all of them. There also won't be room in London, potentially, for all of the people, the ordinary people who want to just come and visit and be there on the day. So there's all sorts to work out. Officials are very worried about huge numbers descending on London and making things like the London Underground network absolutely overwhelmed and unworkable. So there's a vast amount of logistics to settle here as we build up to that event, which is going to take place, as you say, on the 19th.
Let's talk about the King, King Charles III. He hasn't had proper time to actually grieve his mother, and we know they were close. His schedule must be looking very tight. I mean, it's business as usual for him. I think we might have lost Olly there. That was eNCA London correspondent Olly Barratt. Thank you so much for taking your time to chat to us. Of course, we know that the Queen's coffin is at Balmoral and it will be travelling to Edinburgh. And along that route, it's a very short route, like you said, when it finally will be going to Westminster Abbey. But that route will definitely see a lot of other UK small little towns in between and villages that will also be able to get some time to pay their respect to the Queen. And as he also said, we did hear, some people have been reporting that Princess Anne will be travelling with her mother, her late mother. And we are soon to see what else the other royals will be up to and what roles they will be playing for the next coming days. But